Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to the Center for Brooklyn History. My name is Marcia Eli, and on behalf of all of my team here at the center and my colleagues at the Brooklyn Public Library, which we are part of, as well as the Arts and Culture team BPL Presents, it's my pleasure to greet you and say a few words of hello. Tonight, we welcome an expert whose message could not be more timely for our city on this, the day after a decisive mayoral election that put the issues of income inequality and free rides for the ultra-wealthy front and center. According to a 2024 Henley and Partners report, there are almost 350,000 millionaires in New York City. That is one in every 24 New Yorkers. As much as any other city in the world, the riches of capitalism are on full display in our hometown. And the rules of our tax code do a lot to exacerbate the disparities, allowing the wealthiest to hold on to their riches. Author and expert Ray Madoff is a professor at Boston College Law School and the co-founder and director of the Boston College Forum on Philanthropy and the Public Good. Her new book, The Second Estate: How the Tax Code Made an American Aristocracy, demystifies the opaque, Kafkaesque codes that let wealthy people in the United States altogether avoid paying taxes. The book pulls the curtain back on the tricks, the workarounds, the loopholes in our tax code that benefit the ultra-wealthy. It paints a very clear, irrefutable picture of a system severely broken. I am so excited that this conversation tonight will be led by acclaimed podcaster Avery Trufelman, the host and producer of Articles of Interest, which was named one of the best podcasts of the year by The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Atlantic, and many others. And her new podcast, Gear, not as in Richard, G-E-A-R, Gear, just dropped. Following their conversation, we're going to turn to you and your questions. Our ushers will bring the mic to you at your seat. Just please help us out by standing and when you speak and keeping your questions as brief as possible. And, of course, The Second Estate is on sale. You may have seen it at the CBH shop over there in the corner where you walked in. Ray will sign copies at a table in the front. On a personal note, it's especially fun for me to welcome two friends to CBH. Thank you so much for being here. I can't wait to hear your conversation. Now, please help me welcome Ray Madoff and Avery Trufelman to the stage.
Thank you.
Oh, okay. These working all right?
Thanks for coming, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to make this about clothes because I'm like a fashion writer, but I first want to talk about what we're talking about when we talk about rich people, because I remember when people were trying to dig up dirt on Zoran, they were like, Zoran Mamdani was caught eating at a fancy restaurant, and there's always like, oh, so-and-so has a fancy car. It's like, who's rich? Are we rich? Who are we talking about when we're talking about rich people?
Yeah. So there's a lot of ways of defining the rich, as you say, and of course, a lot of it is the rich is anyone who is richer than we are. That's one definition. But for purposes of this book, the rich are anybody who doesn't need a salary. If somebody can get by without earning money, they have enough money that they can live off of, those are the people who are able to continue to grow their money tax-free. And so those are the ones that I'm concerned about in this book.
So just as a point, and we'll get into this, but like you also talk about there are rich people who do pay taxes, but they're totally okay. Like we like them.
Yeah, because the truth is, there is a huge difference between people who work for their money, even if they're getting a very big salary, and people who don't have to work for their money. People who work for their money generally pay quite a bit of taxes, and particularly here in New York, dare I say. There are income taxes at the absolute highest level of all of our taxes, so those come in at as high as 37%. And then there's also payroll taxes, which are as high as 15.3%, and that's just on the federal level. Then, of course, we have state taxes and city taxes, and maybe a little bit more city taxes coming our way, and you know, perhaps appropriately so for all the needs of New York. But people who earn money pay very high taxes, whereas people who have money don't. And so, and that's really where I think the problem lay.
And so, once upon a time, as you write in your book, it used to be extremely clear who these people were, who these rich people were in the Gilded Age. They announced it sort of around the time that the term conspicuous consumption was coined.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about how one used to know in New York City who the rich people were?
Yeah, so the rich people wanted you to know that they were rich. And they did things like, first of all, they built all of these fantastic palaces, right, up Fifth Avenue, and then they went out to Newport, they built palaces out there.
We're talking like 1890s.
1890s, yeah. 1910s, and then they threw these unbelievable parties, but not off on a private island, you can't come parties. They had their parties like, they had glass doors, glass walls, so that the regular people can actually see these elaborate parties that were going on, because the way they showed their status was through conspicuous consumption. That's why that term was developed. It was like, okay, this is how people show that they are big time. They also wore clothes that were very different, right? They wore top hats and fancy things, tons of jewels. And Cornelius Vanderbilt, the daughter of Cornelia,
the daughter.
Anyway, the daughter, also named Cornelius, I think. Anyway, she actually wore crowns. She wore a crown walking around New York City because it was all about being royal.
I'm like, man, they don't make rich people like that anymore. That's
no.
And you were talking about like they would hand out cigars wrapped in $100 bills.
Yeah, at their parties, yes. At the parties, they had like elephants. They would outdo each other. They'd be written on the society pages. It was, back then, the 400, before it was the Forbes 400 richest people, it was the 400, these are the elite of New York. And so they proudly announced themselves as being the elite, and they wanted everyone to see just how very rich they were.
And this is it's not like, this is at the same time as how the other half lives. Like, yes. New York was not in like a better place.
That's right.
Then.
And actually, and at the time, there was work that was being done. That was when, you had a lot of these journalists, the muckrakers, and they were also writing about how poor people were being completely, taken advantage of, and their horrible working conditions, their horrible living conditions. So it was very much these two worlds were sort of being presented at the same time. And this is, of course, concerning because at the time, it raised potential for a lot of social instability. And so that, too, laid the groundwork for taxes.
Go on. Don't leave us hanging.
Well, so you had these super rich people, and you had a lot of people who weren't doing well at all. And a lot of people began to be concerned that the people that weren't doing well would not be so happy with this system of capitalism. And at the time, there were actual alternatives, because socialism was really quite big and was sort of sweeping parts of Europe, and
It's how McKinley was assassinated. It was like
Exactly.
a real threat. Yeah.
It was a real threat. And so because of that, because of the threat of socialism, people that wanted to keep capitalism felt they needed to show that capitalism could serve the public well. And so that was one of the reasons why even the conservative Wall Street Journal advocated for heavy taxes on, particularly on people with inherited wealth. They thought these people, they're a bunch of lazy layabouts, they don't do anything, they live these lavish lifestyles.
They're giving cigars out with
cigars out
$100
wrapped in
bills.
$100 bills.
Yeah.
And all of this is a big problem, and therefore we need to have taxes on inheritances, quite heavy taxes on inheritances. And actually back then, Andrew Carnegie, in his famous Gospel of Wealth, wrote, we have to have heavy taxes on inheritance because all of these rich people running around living on their inherited wealth is a problem. So part of those were laid the groundwork for why there was a push from lots of different people to create a modern tax system.
So that sounds like a happy ending. Well, to bring this back to clothes for a second, I mean, the interesting thing is you say now, like, back then everybody was wearing the, rich people, it was easy to tell who was rich. They had these tiaras, they were throwing these parties where they had elephants serving champagne.
Yeah.
Now, they're just wearing hoodies and looking at their phones like everybody else. Yeah. Warren Buffett has these frayed ties. They're like, don't look at me, How did we get to this like quiet luxury place where you can't tell, or the rich like don't want to draw attention to themselves and they don't really want to stand out and they're trying not to get noticed,
right?
Perhaps. So how did we get from this era
conspicuous
to now?
Consumption to stealth wealth?
Yeah.
So the stealth wealth phase, and probably you know better how we got here than I do. But what I can say is that
I think taxes explain it.
I think is that the stealth wealth phase, I would say, is one reason that some say that we have less of a disconnect. When we see our wealthy, particularly the wealthy that have come about in the last 20 or 30 years, our tech wealthy, right? They are very much just like the rest of us. And I think that just like the rest of us look of the very wealthy has served a protective function. So, you see Elon Musk and he's smoking pot with
Joe Rogan.
With Joe Rogan. He's just a regular guy. Don't go thinking he's somebody fancy or somebody rich. He's just like you and me. Or, everybody in their t-shirts and hoodies and everything else. And so we no longer, when we see our rich, they do look like us. And so they seem less alien. And one of the things that I think that's important to note is how people with high incomes often think that their peer group somehow are people with high wealth, right? That's where their interests lay. But in fact, people with high incomes, tax-wise, have nothing to do with people with high wealth. Indeed, people with high income are much more factually aligned with people with low and moderate amount of income in that we all pay a lot of taxes. And people with a lot of income do indeed pay more taxes than people with lower income, but people with huge amounts of wealth don't have to pay taxes at all.
So, okay. How do they do it? Like, it seems like, so the thing that happened in the intermediate is that like something happened, the tax code got scooped out, none of us realized it. How is it that so many people get away, so many extremely wealthy people get away with not paying any taxes at all?
So let's start with the first transition that caused the wealthy to be subject to taxes. Because in the time when we had all of this, lavish wealth and lots of poor people, the tax system that we had was tariffs, something we've been hearing a lot about today. Tariffs were taxes that were basically borne by consumers and farmers, because in the form of higher prices. And businesses, people who had businesses, they got to benefit when there were tariffs, not only because their businesses, they were producers, and they weren't subject to tariffs, but also when other imports were subject to higher prices, it allowed domestic providers to raise their prices too. So it was like a very happy system for the industrialists and not so great for consumers and everyone else. So because there was this concern about showing the legitimacy of the tax system, that capitalism could work for everyone, in 1913 and in 1916, Congress enacted rules that were designed to tax the richest Americans. In 1913, it was the income tax, the modern income tax, and in 1916, it was an additional estate tax. The estate tax is the tax that applies to transfers of property at death, and then in 1924, they added the gift tax. So they took care of the rich people. And in fact, when these taxes were first enacted, they only applied to the richest 5% of Americans. Nobody else paid any taxes at all. Then, over time, the income tax, as we all know, became applicable to pretty much all Americans. And as they said, it was a transition from a class tax to a mass tax. And for a while, the systems worked very well. We had a progressive income tax, right, that had higher rates for those who had higher income, and we had an additional estate tax, and together they imposed, quite a heavy burden on people with a lot of income and a lot of wealth. The other thing that we had that took place in that period, let's say from like the 30s to the 70s, was we had a lot of government programs that lifted up the middle class. That's why some refer to that time in the 70s as the Great Compression, the time of the least inequality, when the richest 1% owned the least percentage of the country's wealth, and and we had a sort of a robust middle class that had developed.
Can I butt in for a second there?
Please do.
So I want to ask about this decision to make everybody pay income taxes.
Yeah.
So this was kind of a controversial decision to make everybody, well, especially to make everybody, because I think, okay, you talk about how this is a bit of a mystery to a lot of people. This is hidden from a lot of us. The fact that we all pay these taxes and that it's not like marked. It's not like, hey, these are your... This is a huge source of no, sorry, not income taxes, payroll taxes.
Oh, payroll taxes.
Sorry, not income taxes.
Yeah.
You're the tax expert. I'm just a fashion
Yeah.
journalist. The payroll taxes.
The
Sorry.
payroll
so we have
taxes,
income
yes.
taxes and we have payroll taxes.
Yes.
Payroll taxes are what comes out of our pay, and it's like hidden from most people.
Yeah.
That this happens at all. I mean, I'm a freelancer, so I watch it go. I see it. But if you are employed by someone, it just sort of zoop. Goes away. So why is it like hidden from us when it's actually quite a lot of money?
Right.
And why did this get instated?
Right. So we're going to keep our stories straight, right? So we have one story, which is how is it that we got this income tax and this estate tax, and they did all this stuff that we're familiar with. We're going to later on come to the story about how those disappeared. But before we do, we're going to stop and talk about payroll taxes.
Sorry, yes.
Yes, which came in along the way. Okay. So, payroll taxes. Payroll taxes, the story of the payroll taxes in the book starts with the story of Coxey's Army, which was a particular, how many of you have heard the story of Coxey's Army? I know at least a few people have, yes. That's my brother. Because my mother had a phrase in the house, I have to not blast everyone out, she had a very blasty voice. We have enough food to feed Coxey's Army. We're from Boston, and that's how she sounded. And Coxey's Army, I was intrigued to learn, was one of the early stories of the modern Social Security system and the current payroll taxes. Coxey's Army was an army that was a group that formed. There was a depression that occurred, I wish I could remember the year, in the early part of the century. There was a great, it was called the Panic of 1893? Maybe it was in the late part. Anyway, horrible situation, joblessness, banks failure, a big crisis. And Coxey's army was because there was no money to help all of these people who lost their jobs. And Coxey came up with this guy, Jacob Coxey came up with this idea of like, we're going to march to Washington and we're going to get all these able-bodied men and we're going to go from Ohio to Washington, D.C., and we're going to pick up able-bodied men along the way, and it was an unbelievable thing. The news stories followed it. It was huge. Nellie Bly, Nellie Bly was a famous journalist. She joined in the march of Coxey's army, and they showed up in Washington to demand jobs. They wanted some sort of federal jobs program. And basically, Coxey was arrested for walking on the grass. The whole thing was a huge failure because basically the feeling was the government takes money, but the government doesn't provide money. And there was no protections for people for problems of unemployment or old age. Fast forward another 30 years, and we have the next great financial crisis, called the Depression. And they called it the Depression because they didn't want to scare people by calling it the panic.
It's just a little depressing.
It's just a depression, just
yeah.
a tiniest bit, down, up, not a big deal. Right. So we sometimes see this now, right? We don't want to use the word depression now because it turned out that word no longer feels so safe to us. But they thought this will be so much better. Nobody will be scared at all. And the same thing happened, right? Massive joblessness. But at the time, FDR was like, oh, no, we gotta do something about this because this is a problem for the whole country. And there's a number of reasons that shifted things. I mean, one, of course, is the fact that with massive industrialization, people didn't live near their families anymore. So they couldn't rely on that first line of charity of, the kids will take in the parents or whatever.
Right.
But the other problem was there was a tremendous threat, again, of communism. And they did not want the country to turn to communism. So he wanted to show that capitalism could do its thing. And so he created this system of Social Security benefits and unemployment benefits, old age benefits and unemployment benefits. And this system was funded. He wanted it to look not like taxes. He wanted it to look like an insurance program. And so they did all of these things to make it seem like they weren't taxes, but they are very much taxes. Today, it is money that is taken out of current workers to pay the retirement benefits of current retirees. Only there's a lot of ways that it's hidden from the public, right? It's called FICA. They use words like contributions, making you think like you're doing it voluntarily, like, oh, look what I'm contributing. It's very odd, but it's intentionally done that way to make it politically strong. And it was made politically strong, right? Social Security is sort of more protective because people do feel that they've paid into the system, they've somehow earned it. On the other hand, by not calling it taxes, by not calling it what it was, they made it easier for these taxes to increase and increase, and for us to call people who pay payroll taxes but not income taxes non-payers. You might remember Mitt Romney and the 47%, right, of takers, not makers, right? Those were people who he said they don't pay income taxes. The most recent number is 40% that don't pay income taxes, but the vast majority of that group pays significant payroll taxes at quite high rates. And one other thing to note about payroll taxes, since you got me started, is that although tax rates have come down over the past 50 years for estate and gift tax rates have come down from like 90% to 40%, and ordinary income rates have come down from like 70% to 37%, right? They've all come down. Payroll taxes have like more than doubled over that time. So they're much higher than people see. And they are really quite burdensome, particularly for Avery and other self-employed workers who have to pay the full 15.3% themselves. But even when the employers pay the half of it, which they do for people who have jobs, economists believe that that is actually money that would otherwise go in the form of higher salaries to people. So they think that actually employees are paying that half too.
So mid-century, the common person, the common worker is just paying more taxes generally.
Yeah, they're
on
broad.
the
Yeah,
whole.
yep.
So they're paying more. They're paying payroll taxes, whether or not they can see it. They're paying income taxes. Everyone's paying income taxes.
Yeah.
So then, how do the
the
rich
rich get
people wriggle out of it?
Yeah, okay. So what happened is, beginning in 1970s, 1980s, things began to change. And there was a couple of key things that happened. And I think to understand it, we need to step back a little bit and just talk about, like, how do rich people avoid taxes today? Because some people might be wondering, how do they avoid taxes? And can I avoid taxes too? Because that's usually the question that I get from people. Like, okay, like, what are their tricks? So I'm going to tell you what their tricks are, and I'm going to forewarn you, chances are you can't do them. So the first step of the tax avoidance playbook is to avoid salaries. Anyone who's getting a salary, complete sucker. Right? You're paying
payroll taxes.
What you're paying income taxes, you're paying payroll taxes, it's all being withheld, you can't avoid it, right? So anyone who gets, and the government is told by your employer, anytime anyone pays you, they tell you about it, right? So our richest Americans, they're like, no, this is not for us. So Warren Buffett, the guy like, oh, I should be taxed more, right? He takes $100,000 in combined salary and bonus, never more than that. And actually, he reduces it even a little bit more because he uses the office space for some of his personal work. So he reduces his payment a little bit lower than that.
Mark Zuckerberg makes a dollar.
Mark Zuckerberg makes $1. Jeff Bezos makes $82,000, enough for him to claim the child tax credit, which he does. And a lot of these guys, Larry Ellison, dollar a year guys. Now, Elon Musk, people might say, what about Elon Musk? Yes, it's true. Elon Musk he wants to be paid $1 trillion. And so, one could say he does sometimes pay taxes too by exercising his stock options.
But didn't he violate California labor laws by?
Yes, he at one point
making
took
zero?
salaries so low that the California Department of Labor said, like, you're not paying this guy enough. You got to pay him a little bit more. Okay, but they are not like just foregoing salary. Instead, they are being compensated through the enormous growth in value of their stock. And I mean, just over the past couple of years, the numbers are incredible. So Buffett's wealth has grown by $50 billion over the past 2 to 3 years. Zuckerberg's has grown by $100 billion. Larry Ellison's has grown by more than $200 billion. Okay, this is just over the past couple of years. And the thing is that this growing wealth, so if you have this growing wealth, you should do what they do, which is don't sell. And that's how you avoid taxes on the growing wealth. They have lots and lots of wealth. They don't sell. It enables them to continue to control their companies, but it also enables them to avoid taxes. Because under our tax system, you do not pay any taxes unless you sell. Now, this doesn't have to be the way. Both Richard Nixon and Barack Obama said, well, it's fine, like maybe you pay taxes when you sell, but you should also pay taxes when you give it away or when you pass it on at death. You should pay taxes on that gain. And Canada thought it was such a good idea that they adopted that rule, and it's the rule in Canada today, but not the rule here. Here, wealthy people can avoid taxes by not selling. Now, you might say, but yes, they must sell, though, because they want to support their lavish lifestyles. How else is Larry Ellison going to buy his island of Lanai, and which he owns, all the businesses, all the real estate. He's everybody's tenant. He's everybody's landlord and boss. But the way that they do it is they borrow against those funds, and borrowing is entirely tax-free. So, and now you might say, well, yes, but surely they have to sell when they pay back. But they don't really have to pay back because there's always somebody available to lend them money at quite favorable rates. And as long as their wealth grows faster than that rate of interest that they're charged, which it does, then they just always end up ahead.
So you take out a loan to pay the loan.
Yeah,
to pay the
or
loan.
they just, or whoever first lent it to you is happy to keep lending it to you. They don't actually even need to get the principal because they're carrying a loan for which they're being paid.
Wow. And then, like, does someone just take them aside at the Bohemian Grove and tell them this? Like, how do they learn this stuff? Or is this just, like, well known? Really?
Well, it's certainly well known now. I mean, they don't want to sell because they do want to maintain control. So they probably, but a lot like Larry Ellison, he was borrowing even before he had a lot of money. A lot of these guys do borrow heavily, and they just count on the growth. And a lot of them have won that. And then the third way of avoiding taxes. So these are the two ways. First, you can not take a salary. Then you can have some asset that grows tremendously in value and just don't sell it. And then the third way is that you can inherit wealth, acquire money the old-fashioned way, and inherit massive wealth. Because under our income tax system, no matter how much you inherit, you don't pay any income taxes on it. It's entirely excluded from income taxes. Gifts, inheritances, and life insurance is all excluded from income taxes, and you don't even have to tell anyone. You don't have to report it. You don't have to do anything. But some of you may not know this. If you find $20 on the street as you leave here, you're supposed to tell the IRS. Also, and pay taxes on it. Also, if you do any barter exchange, right? If you set up a website for somebody and they like paint your room or something like that, you're both supposed to report that as taxable income, the value of whatever it is that you receive. So we have this really comprehensive income tax system, except you inherit $100 million, don't worry about it. Life insurance of $1 billion, that's yours, right? So we have a very different system for people who inherit wealth.
So why is that the case?
Well, because the rules were put in place on the assumption that we have a robust estate tax. And for a long time, we had a pretty decent estate tax, and Congress did a really good job of closing loopholes. So I'll just give you a couple of examples. So one problem that we had in our estate tax system is people would create long-term intergenerational trusts. They would pass from generation to generation to generation, and people could avoid some of the taxes in between. So in 1976, and then again in 1986, Congress enacted the generation skipping transfer tax, a subject I just taught my students last week, and they're looking forward, I'm sure, to finishing it up tomorrow. So the generation skipping transfer tax is an additional tax imposed at the maximum rate that we impose our estate tax at for people who try to skip a generation. They don't give it to their children, they give it to their grandchildren, because the idea was the tax is supposed to be imposed at every generation. So they enacted it in 1976. Didn't work so well, so they did a new one in 1986. 4 years later, they realized, wait, people are doing all these gaming techniques. They're setting up trusts, complex trusts, and they're hiding value. We got to do something about this. And so they enacted 4 new code sections called the Special Valuation Rules, and they were designed to close those loopholes. Both of these happened under Republican presidents, okay? Regular loophole closing. And yet, since 1990, since the adoption of those special valuation rules, there has not been a single provision enacted to close a loophole in the estate tax. So while estate planners, my students, others, are developing techniques, grats and gruts, crats and cruts, nimcruts and flipcruts, QDOTs, dynasty trusts, these are some of the terms. We have to keep ourselves entertained somehow, and we do it with Dr. Seuss-sounding names. Tax planners have developed all of these schemes, right? And Congress is like, what, something happening here? They're literally doing nothing. Whether the Democrats or Republicans have control, Congress is engaged in complete quiet quitting and has done nothing to close any loophole since 1990. And as a result, the estate tax is really just a tax in name only that really provides cover for the wealthy and no real burden.
And when you say cover, in what way does the estate tax provide cover for the wealthy?
Yeah, because anybody of a certain age, and maybe even just anybody, how many of you have heard the phrase, I got one call out for Coxey's Army, I'm hoping for more on this one. How many of you have heard the phrase death tax? You can raise a hand. Yes, exactly, the death tax. And what about a double tax that hurts family farms and businesses? Have you heard that phrase? Yeah. Okay, so This is all a result of a campaign that was funded by 18 of the country's richest families, the Kochs, the Waltons, the Mars family. The Mars family are big players in this story. Who knew candy was so profitable? Although then you read, like, they also do pet food. I'm like, okay, that's crazy. These people have so many, many, many billions. Anyway, these families got together because they were like, enough already with this generation skipping transfer tax and special valuation rules. We got to get rid of this estate tax because it's killing us. And so they funded this campaign to get rid of the estate tax. They hired this guy by the name of Frank Luntz that some of you might have heard of. He was a pollster who specialized in words. If you've ever noticed how we have changed, we no longer talk about global warming. Remember when we used to talk about global warming? And remember how scary that was? It's getting hotter, it's awful, right? Frank Luntz gave us climate change.
No.
It's just different, not necessarily worse. It's just a change.
He's a genius.
He's a genius. Anyway, he is the one that came up with this phrase, death tax. And he told the Republicans, you never use the word estate tax again, because when he did his polling, like 10% of Americans wanted to get rid of an estate tax, but like 90% wanted to get rid of a death tax, because a death tax sounded both scary and mean. I mean, it was really, and like it comes for everybody, like death, right? And so it was a very effective technique. It was so effective that I realized how effective it was. So for a while, I did work where I was writing about the estate tax, the importance of the estate tax, why we need an estate tax. I was testifying about the estate tax, and I got a call from a journalist who was talking about something, and he was from some lefty type place, but he said the estate tax. He goes, but isn't that like an unfair double tax that hurts family farms and businesses? And I'm like, et tu, lefty journalist, because but it has infiltrated the public so much that everybody feels that it's just somehow, there's something wrong with it. And it used to be quite innocuous. So sad, that's the sad story of the estate tax.
Okay, but this was my question to you, is like, can't we just like Gavin Newsom this, give Frank Luntz a taste of his own medicine and like, PR the estate tax back? Like, if you could do a campaign to like enliven a movement for the estate tax, what would it be?
So here's the problem with the estate tax. The estate tax has an Achilles heel to it, which is the tax is imposed on the decedent's estate, the dead person's estate. And for some people, it will indeed be a second tax on money on which they have paid tax, right? If you had a salary your whole life, and your salary somehow got you up to more than $30 million, which is what the exemption amount is now, right? That's a whole separate story. But if you did, then you'll be paying a double tax, because you'll have paid income taxes, right? 37%, and now you have an additional estate tax. The problem is that it's not really the dead person who is paying the tax, right? They are kind of gone. I don't want to be delicate here. But it really falls on the heirs. And the issue is, why are we giving the heirs absolute tax-free treatment? So I don't think we should save the estate tax. Personally, I think we need to abandon the estate tax, but I would propose that we have some statement like, let's simplify the system and have one system for everyone, something like that. And I need a wordsmith to help me make it a little punchier, but that's the idea.
And you mean the system being one
income tax system?
One income tax
Basically, what we need to do is we need to bring in inheritances and investment income into our income tax system, just the way we do salaries.
But how could you make rich people make an income?
They're not going to, what we would do is say that basically we'd adopt that rule that said that their investments are subject to tax whenever they transfer property. And by the way, there is an enormous amount of transfer of wealth going on into trusts, grantor trusts, dynasty trusts, all of these types of, all those names of things I said, those are all trusts, those are all things I teach my students to do. And there's right now, in New York City, there is an enormous amount of gifting going on all the time, but nobody is recognizing gains on those transfers. But if we adopt the rule that Nixon and Obama proposed at different times, it would be the rule that when they transfer the property, they recognize the gain, because after all, they're now getting rid of it. They enjoyed that rise in profits.
So just to be perfectly clear.
Oh, and then inheritances should also be brought into the income tax system. Sorry, the second one, which is that we could say that everyone can inherit even $1 million tax-free, but after that, they should pay income taxes on it, the way we pay income taxes on found money or lottery winnings or anything else.
And I do love how you have it, this like, come into this, it's like this invitation.
Yeah, so fun, the water's fine.
And not like this tax the rich angle. It's like, come,
Yes, and-
rich,
yeah.
come join us.
And yeah, because,
sorry.
No, go on.
Well, I was going to say, it's not like you like paying taxes, right?
No, nobody likes paying taxes. And sometimes people say, I don't want to tax the rich because I'm going to be rich someday, and then I don't want to have to pay taxes. But the thing is, what people don't realize when they say that is that their likelihood of becoming rich is significantly limited by the fact that whenever they move 2 steps forward, they have to move 1 step back because they have to pay taxes, right? So people who have salaries or other gig workers or anything, right? They're moving 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Meanwhile, the richest Americans are moving 2 steps forward, 4 steps forward, 6 steps forward, 100 steps forward, 1,000 steps forward, right? And that is how we're getting growing wealth inequality. So some system that, like, I believe I'm going to get up there and then I'm going to enjoy those halcyon days, these are delusional for most people, I'd say.
Thank you so much. I think we're ready for questions.
Oh, we've already talked. Okay.
Yeah.
Questions.
Does anyone have any questions?
Oh, there's a.
Must I stand? Okay. Hi.
Hello.
Thank you for the conversation. How about passive income that was developed over a couple of decades, meaning investing? I put in a fair amount of taxes when I had a W-2 income, but I was fortunate enough to retire early. And like a lot of associates and friends, they in turn did the same. And how about those people who don't have a W-2 income? Why should they, be frowned upon?
I wasn't.
Because they do pay capital gain tax, and that's a whole other issue because the capital gain tax is built where it's a much lower rate. But before, if you don't make income, and the definition of what is income, because there is passive income, and yet people pay capital gains tax.
So the people that I'm talking about don't pay capital gains tax because they don't sell their property. Yeah. So.
I just have a technical question. How do they pay back the loans? I still don't get that piece.
They pay back. First of all, there is not a. If somebody lends Larry Ellison $100 million and Larry Ellison is paying them the whatever interest rate they want, they don't really need to give that principal back, right? They're happy. These are people in the business of making loans, and they're happy to keep those loans outstanding. They pay interest, sure. Oh, where do they get the cash? The interest is, I think that they have some money from which they can pay the interest, but paying the interest is, they get quite favorable rates, and it is much cheaper than taxes, yes.
They have to create a pool of money from which to pay it. So they have to sell something someday, somehow.
They do very little selling. So, I don't know what to, yeah.
Yeah. Hi. I'm over here. I'll stand.
There you are. Hello.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good, how are you?
I'm wondering if you could talk, Ray, more about your work on philanthropy and inequality and how the tax code allows for philanthropy to sort of be a site
Yeah.
of influence for super rich people. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Yes. So one thing that we didn't get a chance to talk about is about philanthropy. And of course, the story that we're told is it doesn't matter if the rich pay taxes because they give philanthropy. They create their foundations, and it's so great, and we all benefit. And one of the things that concerns me about this is that how we allocate the tax benefits for charitable giving is deeply unfair. So charities, let me start with the most important thing. Charities are essential to American life, not just the Brooklyn Society, Historical Society, but the libraries, everything that makes our lives rich, right? Charities play a big role and are very important. Our tax system is supposed to encourage charitable giving, but it does so, the way it does so in real life is in very peculiar ways, which is that 90% of Americans get no tax benefits for their charitable giving. So that's one way that it does it. The new tax bill has some provisions where there's like provide a small benefit for Americans to give, but it's not great. On the other hand, for the richest Americans who do smart charitable giving, they donate their appreciated assets, they avoid estate taxes, they get income tax benefits. Their benefits can be worth as much as 74% of their donations. What that means is that when somebody gives $100 million, the government is foregoing up to $74 million in taxes. We are all partners in their charitable giving. And it's the richest Americans that get all of those benefits. The additional problem, though, the one that I'm particularly concerned about, is what we get for that money. And that's because the wealthiest Americans don't typically do their giving directly to charities. Instead, they give to their own donor-created private foundations and donor-advised funds. And these rules were originally supposed to provide regular payment to charities. So private foundations had a rule that 5% had to be spent every year, right? Because we want to make sure, and it has to be public. We have to know so everybody can look up and see where that money is going. However, due to the rise of something called donor-advised funds, that system has been completely undermined because donor-advised funds, these are the charities that are created by Fidelity, Charitable, Schwab, Vanguard, community foundations, and basically they're ways for people to put money aside, get the tax benefits up front, but there's no payout requirement at all.
So they can just park it.
You can just park it. And the financial institutions benefit when you don't spend it. So they encourage you. They're like, create a legacy of this. Name your children as the future givers, right? They have every incentive for you not to spend. And the problem is that donor-advised funds have no payout requirement, and private foundations can meet their payout requirement by giving to a donor-advised fund. And there's complete privacy now because nobody has to. A private foundation doesn't want you to know the types of things they're supporting. You just run it through a donor-advised fund, and you don't have to have anybody see it. So we have these rules that are like pretending to do something that they're not. And so I think that we need to do some reform, both to make sure that that our allocation of benefits is more fair, but certainly to make sure that this money actually goes to charitable ends.
And then you have events like the Giving Pledge. That was my favorite thing.
Yes, exactly. In the book, I talk about the story of the Giving Pledge and how it began with 3 billionaires getting together at a time when the country was suffering a massive financial crisis. And they're like, oh my God, we've got to do something about it. And the people that they looked for, to circle back to the beginning of this, was the Forbes 400, right? The richest 400 Americans. They're like, we got a target on our back. It's being published how much money we have. What are we going to do? They took a year. They had dinners, secret dinners all over the place. And they came up with this idea. I know what we'll do. We'll make a non-binding promise to give half our money for anything, whatever we think is good. Not binding, not anything particular.
To something.
To something, and we'll make a big deal about it. And so that's kind of what they did. We just celebrated 15 years of the Giving Pledge. Yeah. By the way, at the time, I'm curious if those people thought about what happened in other times of financial crisis in our country's history, which was higher taxes, right? So when they're like, we got to do something about this, I would be surprised if they didn't at least have some thought about that history.
Yeah. Wait, is it another question? 'Cause I have
Oh, yeah, over there. We have, who's our, right there. Do you have the microphone? Who is, I'm not, we're not calling that people.
I have a microphone.
You have the microphone.
Absolutely.
Hello.
Hi. So thank you so much for this. I'm sorry to say that
Is that Stephen Dean?
It is Steve Dean.
It's
Yes, you know me.
Stephen Dean,
Hi,
our
how you
own
doing?
expert on philanthropy right here.
It's
Professor-
my co-author Dana here as well.
And
So we got the
Dana
whole
Brinkman
team.
Reiser. How
Yep.
nice to see you guys.
Yeah, great
All
to see
right.
you. Congratulations on the book. And
Thank you.
wonderful
Thanks for
event.
coming.
So I'm curious. So you know that I'm also interested in corporate tax.
Yeah.
And because Amazon canceled my delivery of the book, I haven't had a chance to read it yet. It's still coming, but I don't.
I have to bring up something about
Yeah.
that, if I may.
Do you think this is like a Bezos thing?
That's what well, I was going to ask the crowd. So here's the weird thing, and then I'm going to get to your question, I promise. Here's the weird thing. Amazon, like next day delivery, right? That's the meaning of Amazon. Somehow, they refuse to order enough books to be able to deliver it on time. No matter how many times we contact them to be like, we have books for you. Do you want the books? Do you want the books? They're like, no, we're good. We're like, no, you're not good. There's orders there. You're not filling them. So
Yeah,
I'm
I placed the
worrying
order
that
like months ago and
What's
still
that?
haven't. The order went in weeks ago and I still haven't gotten it. So yeah.
Yeah, do you think it's possible that Bezos is sick of me saying that he takes the child tax credit? right.
I personally find it plausible. So my question is,
Yes.
so if most of the folks you're talking about earn their money through corporations,
Yeah.
right? That's part of the story. And I don't know whether you talk about this in the book. One way to get at this would be to tax those corporations, right? And everybody could get behind that, I think. Nobody likes taxing death, but maybe people like taxing corporations. But if you look at the percentage of revenues generated by corporate taxes since the early 1950s, it's just been like a straight line down. It's
Yeah.
the kind of chart you never want to see. Is that part of the story you tell in the book about the the disparity between the impact of the corporate tax and the individual income tax?
I don't for a couple of reasons. One of them is that corporate taxes, there's a lot of divergent views about who in fact pays corporate taxes, right? And one of the things that's interesting is that the rich, when they want to avoid corporate taxes, they say, corporate taxes, that's just a cost on consumers and employees, both who suffer. When a corporation has to pay taxes, then they can't pay as much to their employees, they can't do as much R&D, they can't do as much they can't keep their prices down because they have to raise it to pay taxes, right? So when they want to fight corporate taxes, that's what they say. When they want to say they're paying taxes, they're like, we're paying all these corporate taxes. And so but when you think about who actually bears the cost, it's one of those questions that one can never really answer because we don't know. It's a counterfactual, right? What would happen if the corporations had more or less taxes to pay? So, and then the other reason I stay clear from it is because of the growing number of pass-through entities that don't have taxes. So we already kind of have this kind of two-tier system on the business side. So.
Can I just ask? Hi, thank you very much. I think I have many more questions now than when you started.
Oh, I did. Uh-oh.
And I'll reserve most of them, but my burning question is, what happens when Sally Moneybags dies and she's got tons of money and she's put it into the donor advised fund?
Yeah.
Where does it go? What happens to it?
As soon as you open up, and by the way, I assume many people in this room have a donor advised fund, and I'm going to confess to this safe crowd that I myself have a donor advised fund because donor advised funds are a vehicle that facilitate getting tax benefits for charitable giving. So lots of people open donor advised funds because it makes sense financially to do so. So I'm not anti-donor advised funds. I'm only anti the current rules about donor advised funds. But when you open a donor advised fund, the very first thing they tell you to do is create a legacy of giving. Name somebody else to give your money in the future. They want you to think about it as a very long-term vehicle. So they really encourage you to do that. And if you don't name it, then like, for example, Fidelity on its own becomes the advisor of that money. And I can tell you, as somebody who worked for Philanthropy tax reform, I suspect a big chunk of that money was spent on funding the anti-reform efforts. So I don't know if you necessarily want Fidelity Charitable to be giving away your money, but they did fund a lot of groups that did fight reform.
So we have time for one more question, and it's over here. Afterwards, as I mentioned, Ray will be signing books at the front. Please help me by letting me bring her to the front, as opposed to coming to talk to her at the stage, and then you can come and talk to her at the table at the front. So here's the last question.
I don't want to be confused with somebody who's rich, but when you talked about taxing transfers, my thinking is, if let's say I transfer my house into a trust, there's no cash there. So if you're putting a tax on that transfer, how does that fit in with your scheme? And also, the word wealth tax has been thrown around lately. Do you have any comment on what that means?
Yeah. So I'm going to start with this second. First of all, when you transfer it to a trust, it depends on who the beneficiaries are. If you're transferring it away, then, there are ways that one can, there's a couple of different things to say about that. One is that if you're talking about transferring a house, those types of transfers, smaller transfers could be exempted from this. If you're talking about transferring, $50 million of stock, people can borrow to pay the taxes just as they borrow to support their lifestyle. So there's lots of ways that taxes can be paid, or one can take out a loan from the government to pay it in the future. So there are ways that one can do that. As for the wealth tax, I am actually not a fan of the wealth tax, and I think that I'm from Massachusetts. I'm a fan of Elizabeth Warren, but I think that the Democrats make a mistake in pushing for a wealth tax. One reason is that the Supreme Court is they have given a warning that they could very well find it unconstitutional, and it doesn't take much to see how they act to think, you know what, given a chance, they will definitely find it unconstitutional. So that's one concern. But a greater concern that I have is that if you had an annual tax on wealth, a lot of people would want to move their money out of the publicly traded stock market with its ready-to-value assets and into privately held interests. And that would be in order to make things that are very difficult to value. We have a very underfunded IRS. It's going to have a very hard time valuing these assets.
You mean like art? Or what do you mean by that?
The IRS has been totally defunded. So right
no,
now,
but when you mean like private assets.
Oh, private assets. So like partnership interests, things that are not traded on a publicly market, who knows what they're worth. And there are these very complex partnerships. A really interesting paper by a guy at Columbia, I think his name's Michael Love, says that you should be taxing complexity. When taxpayers create these super complex instruments with multiple layers of partnerships, I think it's a great idea because nobody can capture the value. So my concern is that we'd see people pulling money out of the stock market, which would affect all sorts of people who have their retirement money in there. So I am not a fan of wealth taxes. I know, surprising. Anyway, is that?
Well, can we have thank you so much. Another round of applause, please, for a wonderful conversation.